Hello, this is Dalkaen, and this is the first of a test run for a new video review series of games I've taken an interest in. Assuming I can work up the motivation to undergo the editing and writing process on a consistent basis, I'd like to continue doing it. But that depends entirely upon how this turns out and what kind of feedback it receives. This is something I've been wanting to do for years, but never quite worked up the urge to really try. Because so many of the games I play are long-winded RPGs, I decided to tackle something considerably shorter for my first presentation: Mega Man Zero. I've been getting into Mega Man again in a big way after picking up where I left off with the original series with Mega Man 9 and 10, the former of which I discussed at length on my blog. After doing a little research, I decided to tackle the Mega Man Zero series because it was developed by Inti Creates, the same developer responsible for those retro reboots. Although I'd prepared myself before diving into Mega Man Zero and had been forewarned by a variety of sources that it was a difficult game, I still found myself taken aback by just how challenging a game it is. I'm by no means a skilled platformer or action game player, due in no small part to my lack of experience with the genre, but I have played the entire original Mega Man series to completion. You'd think that'd give me some level of credentials at least. Even so, the difficulty of Mega Man Zero hit me like a brick wall. Initially, I wasn't sure I felt prepared to commit to it because I imagined I wouldn't be able to complete it in a million years. Of course, this is exactly how I felt about Mega Man 9 when I first played it in 2008, but I found out just last month that a little perseverance goes a long way. I applied that same line of reasoning to Mega Man Zero and came out victorious, albeit battered and bruised. It wasn't a pretty performance, but I made it through and honestly had a blast doing it. Mega Man Zero is of course more in the vein of the Mega Man X series in terms of gameplay, with high-speed dashing, wall jumping, and chargeable blasters. Zero returns from that series, although this particular game seems to take place 100 years in the future, with an entirely new art direction but similar feel. The ability to charge his Z-Saber is a notable change from the tried and true formula, but of particular note are his new weapons, constructed by the Resistance Base's engineer Servo. The Triple Rod is a strange staff capable of extending out in all 8 directions, whereas the Shield Boomerang is not entirely unlike Captain America's shield. After charging it to 2 levels, Zero can fling the shield out a sizable distance, tearing apart all enemies in his way. While charging, he blocks projectiles in his path. This comes in pretty handy in the final areas of the game where the screen is blotted out by projectiles flying from every direction. Upon initial release in 2002, Mega Man Zero was marketed as a fiendishly difficult Mega Man title intended for hardcore gamers, with a twist intended to lure in more casual players that I'll discuss in a little bit. As far as being a hardcore game, that description is certainly apt. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not great at action games. I can generally cheese my way through them well, but for the most part, these games just take a ton of trial and error on my part until I finally, mercifully, get it right. Take for example the first Maverick boss of the game, Aztec Falcon. I've just started playing this game and getting used to the controls, and this guy is destroying me. Let's not forget that I have to manage my time wisely either, because the devs were kind enough to include a time limit as well. It was at this point that I wondered very seriously if the game was for me, and maybe that's what Inti Creates were going for with the high barrier of entry. It is a game designed principally to appeal to those gamers who have masterful reflexes and want nothing more than to sink their teeth into a game that demands extreme amounts of patience and skill. Okay, so maybe I'm exaggerating a bit here. Aztec Falcon's not too hard after you get his pattern down. Like most Mega Man games, it is possible to learn levels and bosses through trial and error through repeated failures. Once a pattern emerges, it is generally possible to significantly reduce the difficulty you experience on particular bosses. In most cases, this is pretty true, and none of the game's encounters are balanced in a particularly unfair way, especially once you gain access to upgrades. Let's talk about the upgrades though, shall we? First of all, it should be noted that Mega Man Zero rates you on every mission you complete. Your score is dependent upon a number of factors, including speed, damage taken, and enemies destroyed. This is fine, although I'll admit I frequently take issue with games with rating systems, but maybe that's because I almost never get good ratings in those games. Mega Man Zero is notably no exception, and here's why. The game penalizes you for upgrading your character. That's right, for every upgrade you apply to Zero, from hidden creatures called cyber elves of all things, a points penalty will be applied to all final mission scores. With my RPG background, I'm a big believer in progression, in becoming stronger over time and unlocking new abilities and skills. For this reason, the cyber elf system appeals to me. These hidden characters unlock life upgrades like heart containers in Mega Man X, sub-tanks that refill health in a pinch, and even more subtle upgrades like run speed and defense. Because I generally always seek the endgame fantasy in my games, RPG or otherwise, I want it to be as decked out as possible for the final encounters. So I sought out all the life upgrades, the vaunted double health upgrade, 3 of the 4 sub-tanks, what have you. But this made it impossible to maintain a decent rank. In fact, for the vast majority of the game, I sat at a measly F. Of course, rank amounts to little more than bragging rights in Mega Man Zero, save for one hidden cyber elf, but it makes me feel bad. It's a negative association that has no right to be there. Why the game punishes me for doing what makes the game fun is utterly mystifying to me, and I struggle to understand their design choice. Let me explain Cyber Elves in a little more detail. In the Mega Man X series, upgrades are found scattered around the various stages in the form of heart containers and armor pieces. Cyber Elves are similar, except not all of them are permanent upgrades. Some of them bestow temporary effects on Zero, like the ability to dodge a pit, a la Beat from Mega Man Classic, or splashier effects like halving a boss's HP bar. Cyber Elves can be used by equipping them in the base and using them on a mission from the subscreen. However, many of the Cyber Elves can only be used after being fed a specific number of energy crystals, which drop frequently from defeated foes. In many cases, the number of crystals required to mature a Cyber Elf is excessive. Because I was so dedicated to the idea of becoming as powerful as possible, I spent a lot of time revisiting specific stages and mindlessly grinding out crystals to upgrade my Cyber Elves. Once again, I felt like I was being punished for trying to make my character stronger, but I soldiered on even so. My patience did eventually run thin though, and I didn't grind out the crystals for every upgrade, but I did end up with all of the important ones like the double health and defense upgrades. Of course, the game is punishingly difficult, and at least half of my motivation for collecting all those upgrades was to make the game a little more palatable. And of course these upgrades succeeded in doing so, maybe a little too well. The game is balanced in such a way that it can be completed reasonably without equipping a single upgrade. This is the easiest way to maintain an S rank and unlock all the game's hidden content. Assuming I had weeks and weeks to practice, I might even be capable of doing such a thing. But let's be real here, it's not fun for me. My ideal difficulty curve allows me to acquire an immense amount of strength by the time endgame comes around and still feel pressured by bosses and encounters. This is not the case with Mega Man Zero. By the time I reached the final dungeon, every boss was an absolute breeze that I was able to defeat without a sweat. Of course, after hitting my head into a brick wall for the first half of the game, I can't say I was overly upset by this, but it's still worth noting. I might have found a more rewarding experience if I stubbornly refused to upgrade my character and replayed levels over and over to ensure I obtained a higher rank, but I'm afraid I just didn't have it in me. After all, the first time I fought Harpua, I'm pretty sure it took me 30 tries to finish her off. That level of dedication is not sustainable for me. After a certain point, I would have just been ready to move on. Overall, though, I enjoyed Mega Man Zero. It has nice and colorful graphics for Game Boy Advance, superbly tight controls, a couple of memorable tunes, and some great gameplay. My hands hurt from feverishly playing it over the past couple of days, but I don't regret my decision to tackle it at all. It seems a foregone conclusion that I'll soon move on to Mega Man Zero 2, but I may decide to approach it differently than its predecessor.